Hey guys, I'm Brooke. Welcome to Inside Renovation. Hey, before we start today's episode, if you ever have a question, a topic, anything you'd like to ask Pastor Kody, you can always send those to podcast@renovation.church. And in today's episode, we are talking about generosity. I know it sounds a little weird. Sometimes it can be a touchy topic, but today we are going to tackle all of that. Pastor Kody really leans on how it changes your heart, and we can't wait for this episode. I feel like the first question I got to ask you is, do you consider yourself generous?
Ooh, why would you ask that? Oh my gosh.
I mean, I feel like it's one of those questions where it's uncomfortable, but generosity is such a good quality to have. And I feel like,
I think I would consider myself generous. Not as generous as I would like to be. Mm-hmm. Still something I'm working on. But in comparison, not to other people, but to where I was, oh my Lord.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm wildly generous now.
I was going to say,
compared to like where I was 5 years ago, I'm far more generous today than I used to be.
Yeah. I feel like generosity and that word really is kind of such an uncomfortable topic.
Yeah, for sure.
When it comes to church specifically.
You mean people don't like talk about money in church?
No.
Or pastors talking about money? Didn't know that.
Isn't that crazy? I feel like cultivating that spirit of generosity is such it's a great place to start because like you said, where you were before to where you are now, kind of that story process of where you were at the beginning of your relationship with Christ to where you are now. Start at the beginning. Tell us about your generosity in the beginning.
Well, there wasn't any generosity in the beginning or any giving whatsoever. I mean, I came to Christ at 18, so growing up in church, in and out of church, I should say, money wasn't really talked about much. And then the times it was super just like in your face, over the top, that kind of thing. And so I really never thought much about it until, I'll be honest, until I was on staff at a church. Like for the first, I went on staff at a church at 23. And even then, money was never talked about at my first church. And it was never talked about to me as a staff member. We never really did any kind of giving initiatives or things in the community and I think because the church that I was first a part of was a split from another church that always talked about money. So it was just a super sensitive topic. And so I actually didn't really have a knowledge of generosity or tithing or giving. And it never really got taught to me on why it was important. And so I knew how giving spontaneously made me feel, you see somebody on the street and you do something good for them or whatever, or giving my time, when I served in a service project, I knew how it made me feel. But as far as actual giving my money, man, really didn't start for us until right before we even started this church. I mean, I think when I was at Cross Point is when I really actually started giving and understanding and getting a heart for generosity was when that began. So that was probably, 7 years ago would probably be a fair assumption. Well,
and I feel like I need to put a period right here for really quick because I feel like there's probably people watching this or listening to this that are like, Map, they're talking about money.
Right.
Let me turn this off really quick.
I know.
And we're not talking about this to ask you for money.
No,
we're kind of talking you through generosity and what that means, because generosity doesn't mean just giving your money.
Yeah.
Right. I feel like there are so many ways that you can be generous, not just at your church, but also in your personal life or at work, in your relationships or friendships. Yep. Generosity is like I said in the beginning, it's such a great quality to have. And I think it's one of those things when people are like, what are the good qualities about you?
Yeah.
I don't know if I've ever heard anybody say, oh, I'm generous.
I know.
But what a great quality to have.
Right. I wouldn't describe, if you asked me, give me your top 3 qualities, I would be like, oh, I'm generous.
Yeah.
I would love for someone else to say that about me. I would love that to be a top quality of mine. But you're so right. This isn't some kind of ploy to get people to give money to the church or anything like that. Yeah. I think generosity is so connected to your heart. More than you even know. Yeah. In fact, I would say that I really learned that in our first year and a half to 2 years of the church, because I decided to do a sermon series on giving. It wasn't because we were hurting financially. We weren't raising money for anything in particular. But I knew, I was never taught this. And what God has done in me over the years, I thought, I need to teach this because of what it did for me and my heart. It wasn't about who benefited from my money or my time or my words. Because as you said, it's not just money. It was what it did in me that I was like, man, I want people to experience what God has done in me through learning to be generous more than I care about if they give money. In fact, I wasn't even Like I was completely unaware, wasn't even looking at money. I was like, I don't want to know what the church even brings in per se during that time, because I was making sure my heart was pure in communicating it. And what was interesting was when we did that very first series, I think it was called Kingdom Culture. We had more people give their life to Jesus in that series than we've ever had in any series I've ever done.
Unreal.
Because there was so much connected to people's heart. And I think that's what I really hope people get from this conversation today is, man, let's talk about the heart more than just the hands. There's enough of that, right? Like the whole concept of this podcast is what's on the inside. Like how do we deal with what's in here? And that's what I think Jesus really gets at in the New Testament when you talk about this idea of generosity or giving. He connects it to, man, your treasure is where your heart is.
Yeah.
Right. And so,
Well, let's talk about that. You mentioned kind of like how generosity and this like, process of getting to where you are today. What are some of the things tangibly that you feel changed in your heart? Some of those stories maybe that you have about ways that, that kind of transformed you? For sure.
When we started out, I mean, I would say we started out and had what I call a scarcity mindset. And I think part of the reason why, and maybe even why I think it's hard for people to give anything, whether it be, again, money, time, but let's specifically talk finances for a second. When Jessica and I got married, that was in 2013. I was 23 years old. She was 24, fresh out of college, looking for a job, a career, like not making a lot of money. So naturally, it's like, hey, we don't make a lot of money anyway. Like there's lack, right? And then it was like, okay, got a car. So she got a car payment. I got a truck payment. I had $40,000 in student loans. She decided a year into marriage, she wanted to go back to get her master's degree, which we had to pay for out of pocket. So then we were living on credit cards. So like by year 2 of our marriage, we were in over $100,000 of debt and living on a credit card on just a youth pastor's income who had no experience. You can imagine what that would have been, right? So we're scraping by. So the idea of like generosity, it's like, dog, what are you talking about?
You're gripping
like,
onto what you can.
That's not the season for us, right? So it just never even became a conversation really in our household. So I think that was a big turning point for me in our marriage recently, that really like that when things started to shift, we went through Financial Peace University, old Dave Ramsey, and I don't agree with everything that Dave Ramsey says. He's a lot smarter than me. I'll give him that. Yeah. I don't necessarily I'm not walking around with an envelope of a couple $100 in cash all the time. Like that's not like, I'm not anti like credit card either, by the way. Okay. Yeah. So please don't hear me say all that. But there were so many principles like the snowball effect that you can have on debt that was super helpful for us in that season of our life to be able to knock out some of that debt, and even some things we could do to consolidate debt that really freed up some monthly payments and all kinds of stuff. But I think what really did it for me in that way was, again, what God did in my own heart during that season. And it brought me back. I remember when I started to just like faithfully give, it brought me back to this moment I had earlier in college before I was married. I was a Christian. And I remember going to the Nike outlet one day, just got paid. And I was wanting to get, some new clothes and shoes and all this stuff. Well, I got some, it was like when I was playing flag football. And it was when they had, like the Under Armour, like warm.
The like tight.
Yeah. Like that just kind of hit the scene, right? And Nike had some. So I was like, oh, bet I'm going to get that. Well, it was freaking expensive. I mean, it was like $100 for the pants. It was insane. So I found some clearance items, some sweatpants and a hoodie. No one was checking the dressing room. Get it. I'm a believer now. Okay. And I failed miserably because I wore that underneath the hoodie and the sweatpants. It had no tags on it, no sensors. Walked out, got away with it. It was gone. Get back. Roommate sees me. Yo, what's that? And I was caught. And he's like, bro, you're going to take that back to Nike right now. And I remember going back the next day, and on my way there, it was like one of those moments where it's like almost like the audible voice of God. Like, Kody, you didn't just rob Nike. You robbed me, and you robbed yourself. Yeah. And I think people miss the fact that when Jesus in the New Testament, or God, through the prophets or whoever throughout the Old Testament talks about giving, it's always been connected to your heart.
Yeah.
And it's really more about what God wants to do in and through you than to get something from you. God don't need nothing from you. Like, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
like,
good.
what do you think you're going to give God something he don't already have or
Yep.
own? Like, God's
Yep.
not after your money. Are you kidding me?
Mm-hmm.
It was more about like, I want you to be a river, not a reservoir. Like, I'm trying to get something through you to bless other people.
Yep.
And by stealing, you robbed me of the opportunity to prove myself faithful and provide what you need.
Yeah.
Because you didn't trust me enough. And clearly, and then the other thing was like, and you thought you needed all this crap, and you
Right.
didn't need it. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So my priorities are just all out of whack. So like,
Yep.
it brought me back to those moments of like, man, I don't want to rob God of the opportunity to do something great in me, but through me, because something else besides God has my heart.
Mm-hmm. So
And
true.
that was the shift for me. It's like, does this have my heart?
Mm-hmm.
And there was like, for me, there was this scarcity mindset, which we could talk about more in a minute. But
Yeah. Well, and I feel like maybe there might be somebody listening who isn't there yet, who's
Yeah,
not,
sure,
they're at the
of course.
beginning stages
Yep.
of, I need this because, I don't have the money to give, or I'm not sure
Yep.
if I agree with
Yep.
that. Kind of take us through some of those stories in the Bible, or maybe just tangible ways we can talk about how everything truly does belong to God.
Yeah. Well, first off, let me say, I guess I will talk about the scarcity concept there for a second, because I think that is really where it starts.
Mm-hmm.
It actually doesn't start with your money. It starts with your mind.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't start in the wallet. It starts in the head. And I think most of us, me included, the greatest challenge is getting past the scarcity mindset. And what I mean by that, when I say scarcity mindset, I've used it a couple of times. So let me explain. Scarcity mindset is when, let's say, you get paid, you consume, right? And most of us feel like we don't have enough naturally. That's been a problem with humanity for a long time, right? Adam and Eve in the garden, we don't have enough. We're missing something. So there's this, like, we consume whatever it is we make. And then typically we feel like we don't have enough, so therefore we lack. And when we lack and we wonder, am I going to be able to do the things I need to do, pay my bills, whatever, and I want to do and enjoy, when we feel like we're unsure, we fear.
Yep.
And then we allow fear to kind of take over. So what happens, the next time we get paid, we consume more, we lack, we fear, and it becomes a cycle, not just in your money, but in your mind, and it's the way you live your life.
Right.
And it's that way with relationships.
Yeah.
You're in a relationship, they're not giving you what you need, you lack, oh my gosh, now I fear, and then the next relationship, you're in the scarcity mindset again, and you're watching for something to go wrong.
Yep.
And therefore, the moment it does, it's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy, right?
Right.
So it's like this mindset of scarcity. A mindset of abundance would say, okay, whenever let's say I get paid or I receive, the first thing God calls me to do is to first give it.
Mm-hmm.
So the first thing I do is, like, before I do anything else, I'm going to give. And when I give, I believe not that there's lack, but that God provides.
Yep.
And as God provides...
We're real out here, y'all.
That's
okay?
right. That's a truck. Yeah. As God provides. We're in the country, boy.
Right.
So when God provides, though, so first we give. God shows himself faithful to provide. And then what happens when he does provide, you don't fear it, builds your faith.
Mm-hmm.
So then the next time you're not living from this place of fear, you're going, you know what, man, God's provided before, and look what he did. I'm going to trust him again.
Yeah.
And what happens is it creates a new cycle in your mind in abundance. And I'm telling you, man, for me, it started there because it revealed so many other areas of my life, ministry, leadership, relationships, that I was like, man, I'm thinking with a scarcity mindset and how I even treat people.
Yep.
And how I make decisions as a pastor.
Well, that's exactly what the enemy wants, right?
100%. So I think some ideas in the Bible, like, okay, so I talked about giving first. Let me kind of start there, right? That's the idea of tithing, which makes everybody uncomfortable, right? So like, it made me uncomfortable.
The T word.
Imagine teaching on it, right?
Yeah,
so like, I get it. The idea of tithing is less about percentage and more about priority. Mm-hmm. So all throughout the scriptures, the idea of the tithe, right, is tithe literally means a tenth or 10% of your income or what you bring in, right? So it's not just a tenth. In fact, it's the first 10%. Mm-hmm. And you actually see this concept that the principle of first or of priority, you can track all the way back Genesis 4, Cain and Abel, if you really wanted to.
Yeah.
Like, why? Because what happens? Why does Cain kill Abel? Well, because God asked them to bring their produce or their livestock as a sacrifice, as a gift, as an offering to the Lord. What does it say? If you go read that scripture, it will say that Cain, after he had already kind of done everything, he basically brought his leftovers. He brought what was left. Abel brought his first and his best. And it says God accepted Abel's offering, but he rejected Cain and his offering. And he says, if you do what is right, right? And so what happens is Cain gets jealous, angry, and hurt at his brother Abel. And God's like, listen, if you'll bring me your best, I'm going to bless it.
Yeah.
But you're not giving me your best. This isn't about priority for you. This is about duty.
Right.
And so a lot of people, when they hear tithing, they think, man, this is about, I have to. No. You're missing it. It was really never about you having to do anything. This is God going, I want to be first in every area of your life.
Yeah.
Am I first? That's what it was about. Now, again, tithing is a tenth. So God says, I want the first 10% of your income. Go read Malachi 3. Bring it into the storehouse, a picture of the local church, so that there may be food in my house. Yeah. Right? So there's that idea. Now, the argument then being, well, does Jesus confirm tithing? What does he actually do? Well, if you go there, what you'll actually see is Jesus he one-ups tithing. Yeah. Right? So he doesn't ever take it away. Matthew 23:23, he's having a conversation with the Pharisees, and they're basically bragging because they tithe faithfully. And Jesus doesn't tell them to not tithe. He goes, you should tithe, but don't neglect the weightier matters of the law. Like, the tone there is like, well, obviously you tithe, duh. Like, obviously you give your first 10%, great. Yeah. But then you treat people like crap. Because you think, well, I give the money so I can treat people however I want to. And he's like, well, you've missed it. That's not the most important thing. Right. Like treat people right. Love, justice, mercy. Like, those are the more important matters of the law. So do those things. But of course, you tithe as well, right? Yeah. So, like, I think that's the idea. But then you also get, like, man, we talk about, man, you want to give it from a generous heart. And that's what he says, hey, don't give under compulsion or pressure, but pray and seek God and ask God, and then give with a cheerful heart, for God loves a cheerful giver. Well, what's that about? Again, your heart. Yeah. It's that simple. It's been that way ever since. And so I think that what Jesus gets at, Matthew chapter 6, 7, when he's on the Sermon on the Mount, he's talking about giving from your heart, praying from your heart. Fasting, it's all about your heart. It's not to be seen. Right. It's not about what you can get. There's something tied to your heart. And so it's like, hey, where your treasure is, there your heart is also. Don't worry about tomorrow. Why? Right. Tomorrow's got your heart. Yep. People got your heart. Possessions got your heart, right? So, yeah.
I feel like you said something before we started recording this about giving to not be blessed. Yeah. What did you say? What was that quote that you said? Yeah,
that's good. Yeah. So under the old covenant, a lot of times what the pressure was felt was like, man, we give in order to get blessed. Where in the New Testament, we give because we already are blessed. Right. So we don't give because we're trying to get God to bless us. We give because God already has blessed us. So everything I have, every good and perfect gift, James says, comes down from the Father of heavenly lights, right? So, like, everything I have belongs to God. Yeah. Everything. So he owns it all. I'm not the owner. I'm the manager. I'm the steward, right? Yep. Like, God goes, hey, I own it all. Those kids, they ain't your kids. They're my kids. That's fast. I trusted you to raise them. That house, that ain't your house. That's my house. Yep. You know what I'm saying? That money, that job, that's my job. That's my money. I own it all, but I'm trusting you to steward it and steward it faithfully. And so it's not like, hey, I'm going to give to God to get him to bless me. He's already blessed you. You have what you have because of God. Right. Point blank. So it's like, I'm not trying to get the favor of God. I'm going, God, I believe you at your word. I'm not going to let this thing control my life. Yeah. Possessions, I'm not going to let it control my life. And so what I would say, and what I've told a lot when I've taught this, is I give first, and I give my best, and I trust God with the rest. It takes faith to give first. Yep. It doesn't take faith to give last. Nope. So I'm going to give God, and I'm going to trust that 90% with God's blessing will go further than 100% without it. Yeah. So I'm going to go, hey, yeah, I can hold it all on myself. But if God's hand ain't on it, what does it matter? Right. So.
And I think that there are always so many cool stories when it comes to, like, tithing, or when it comes to being generous or things like that, where you'll see these like tangible ways where God's like, thank you, and like blesses you tenfold.
Yep.
And that happened to my husband, Andrew, and I, where.
Talk about it. Let's go.
So Andrew has a very, odd job, or had an odd job, where he travels a bunch for work, and he's always gone. And then there's like a couple months out of the year where he's not making a lot of money. He's off the road, things like that. So there are some times where you're just like, okay, things are a little tight right now. We haven't really, accounted for what we're not getting this month, things like that.
Right.
So I remember specifically it was a month where he wasn't working a ton. A big thing happened with his career, and he just like didn't have work for like 3 or 4 weeks. Yeah. And that's a month of no income. And it's just like, okay, we just bought a house.
Right.
Help, you know?
For sure.
And those thoughts cross your mind where we're like, I don't think we can afford to tithe this month. So we literally had just gotten that paid. That night I went out to dinner with some of my girlfriends, and one of the girls brought her mom. She was in town from Texas. And her sweet mom randomly started talking about this story about how she didn't have enough. She tithed anyway because it was God's and not hers, and how she was blessed from it. Yeah. And like, I had just met her for the first time. Right. She didn't know anything about my life. And I'm just sitting there like eating my chips and queso, like, okay, God, I hear you, you know? Yeah, sure. And it's just like, I'm like, okay, I'm going to go to the bathroom. And I literally go to the bathroom and like renovation.church do my giving. And I'm like, so basically I'm just like, sorry, God, sorry. Not sorry, but like I hear you. Like, you're right. We do have enough. We will have enough. And even if we don't, we'll figure it out.
It's a mindset thing. Yes. And here's what I would tell people. Listen, okay. So let's say you're in a spot where you're like, there's no way I can give 10% of income. Look, it's not about percentage. Right. It's about priority. Mm-hmm. So just start somewhere. Yeah. Like, man, when Jessica and I we were in so much debt. Are you kidding me? There's no way we could tithe 10%. Like, we couldn't. Yeah. So here's what I've told people. Look, just become a percentage giver. Be faithful with your money. Yeah. Don't let it have your heart. So like, we started off and it was like, we're going to give like 3%. Yeah. And the goal was every year, let's give more. Like, so let's up it 1% every year until we get to a healthy. We did that with our church. Yeah. So, hey, we're going to start with 10%, which we did. And now, like, to outreach alone. And now it's like we're up to 12 or 13%. And every year the goal is to just be able to become more generous. Yes. And that's really what like our heart is. So like, man, if you're listening right now, like, please don't feel this like pressure. Again, if you never give here, we still going to feed you. We still going to love on you. That's not why we're doing this podcast. Like, that's not our heart. That's not the heart of my preaching. Mm-hmm. And so, but I would just say, whatever you do, like, invest wisely and generously into something that makes a difference in the kingdom. Yeah. I personally believe, and I think that Jesus would agree with me, because it's the one thing he's building is the church. Yeah. There's not a greater organization on the planet or a greater group of people on the planet that has made a larger difference in the world nationwide than the Church of Jesus. 100%. So why would you invest and not steward your finances, your energy, your heart, your time, your emotions into the thing that Jesus is building? So that's for me. Yeah. But that's just what I would say, man. I think that like it is. It's a hard conversation. It's hard. But maybe the reason it's hard and people clench up, at least for me, I know for me, was because it had my heart. Yeah. At the end of the day, there's still something there that's like, And so here's what I've encouraged people to do, and I would encourage all of us to kind of think through. You kind of see three different examples in the scriptures of maybe how to be generous. Mm-hmm. Okay. So the first one you can kind of talk about, which I think we all are doing a lot of the time, is like giving spontaneously, right? Mm-hmm. This is when you like, man, you're out and you see a need. Somebody needs help. A friend needs a light bill paid, or a cell phone bill, or gas in their car. Mm-hmm. And you give spontaneously. Yeah. Now, I think here's what I also believe. And I wish I'd have said this earlier. Can we edit this? No.
I mean, we can, but just say it now.
Yeah. Like what I would tell people is I really believe that everybody wants to be generous. Yeah. I actually believe everyone inside of them goes, man, I want to do good. Mm-hmm. I actually don't believe people are like, you know what, I just want to consume it all for myself. I think that's the sinful fleshly side. Right. But there is a greater spirit in them, the Spirit of God, who is generous. Yep. And I think he causes us to want to be generous. So let me get that out of the way. But spontaneously, what happens is the words of Jesus become true. It's better to give than to receive. Mm-hmm. There's something inside of you that comes alive when you know I used something I had to meet a need in someone else.
Yeah.
Right. So I would encourage people, give spontaneously. Yeah. Second thing I would tell you is give strategically, which is what I just talked about. It's like, hey, I don't know what I can give, or I can't give what I'd like to give now. Okay. So then give faithfully and come up with a plan. People make plans for all kinds of stuff. Right. And we plan on spending our money. What would happen in your life if you planned on actually giving or saving your money?
Yeah.
How much better your life would be. You know what I'm saying? Because that money's going somewhere. And if you don't plan for it to go somewhere, it's going to plan it for you. Right? So like, let's schedule it. So it may just be you start somewhere and come up with a plan that works for you. Great. Yeah. Do it from a generous heart. You know, and then the last one I would say is giving sacrificially. And that is that above and that is that beyond. That is the widow in scripture that comes and goes, here's what I have.
Everything. Yeah.
And it wasn't about the amount. Right? You see the spontaneous example in the Good Samaritan, where he sees him on the side of the road and he needs help, right? You see strategically where it's like, man, the generous plan to do what is generous.
Yep.
And so, so spontaneous, strategic, and what was the last one? Spontaneous, strategic.
What did you just
sacrificial.
say? Sacrificial. I was like,
Those three things for me are like when I think about when you asked if I was generous, my mind went to one of those three things. Man, how have I spontaneously given lately?
Yeah.
And am I in the position to, which comes in strategically, I want to position my finances in my life to be able to do that.
Yeah.
When the time comes, I think most people want to help. So you got to plan or it will never happen.
Well, and it's funny that you mentioned how you feel like everybody wants to be generous.
Yeah.
Because I feel like recently on social media, whether it be TikTok, Instagram, there's these videos going viral of people buying someone's groceries or somebody, gifting somebody spontaneously this and saying, okay, what should I give the next person?
Yeah.
And specifically, there's this guy, Jimmy Darts. He's like out of LA.
Okay.
He just is like,
shout out Jimmy Darts.
Shout out to Jimmy Darts.
Don't know you, bro, but you can follow if you want.
He really does, though. He started off just doing kind things for people. Like he'll walk around a Walmart and he'll be like, hey, how are you doing today?
Yep.
And he's just like, okay, well, I have this for you. And they'll open up a case and it's 100. And he's like, this 100, however much money for you. And it was just something he did. And then all of a sudden it created this spiral effect where people are like, there's a specific Venmo account that people will give to that he literally takes all of that and gives it to somebody else. Yeah. And it's just like, all of my followers just raised $15,000 for you. We saw that you were homeless. Right. Then it like gives them a jump start. And he's like, it's all this spontaneous generosity that literally turned into like life-changing things for certain people. And it's like
100%.
Little things like that. You can really tell the world does all want to be generous. Even if it's $1 here, $2 there, it's just like you're giving to something that's going to help other people.
That's right. And a lot of times we just don't feel like we can, and it's like, because it's not planned and it's not, we don't live on budgets. We don't. And so some of this is so practical of just like, man, take the fact that I'm a pastor out of here anyway. I'm not a financial guru or anything, but like, if you don't like tell your money where it's going to go, it's going to tell you where you're going to go. You know what I mean? So it's like, let's just be honest about it. So like, if you want to be able to live that way, you have to plan to live that way. And it's not the easiest thing to do.
No.
And that's a principle for life. And I think it's awesome. I've seen those same videos where it's like, I've seen people go up to Walmart and be like, hey, here's $10, or should I double it and give it to somebody else? And they're like, double it.
Give it to
go
someone
somebody
else.
And it's like, here's $20. Should I give it to you or double it? Double it. And they just like keep going. And I've watched some that get up into the like hundreds of dollars. Because I think the idea of like, I could have taken that, but I chose not to take it to help somebody else, makes those people, like somebody come up and offer me $500. Hey, you want 500? You me double somebody else. But give me the 5. You know what I'm saying? Like, but it's like, but at the same time, go, but if you knew the story of the person that got the 1,000 and that you just paid their rent, and if you weren't going to pay their rent, they were going to get evicted, or they weren't going to be able to pay for their child's daycare, or whatever it may have been, you don't even know. So it's like that idea that when I give my money a mission. Yeah. And I'll end on this thought. We sent a team to Honduras last year. It's a mission partner we have at our church, and we're going to send another team in spring of 2024 to Honduras as well. And I didn't go, but I went. And the reason I know I went, I didn't go and play with all of the kids in the VBS program. It's a boys' home. I didn't go and teach the Bible. None of that. We gave all of these like Crocs. That was like the shoes that they really needed and wanted because they're just so versatile.
Shout out to Crocs. They're so comfy.
I know. I got some Canes. They're not Crocs, but they're kind of like sports Crocs.
Yeah,
anyway,
they're the same.
But that was their needs. So we gave them Crocs as well and all this stuff. I did not physically go, but I went because my money went.
Yep.
And so I got to be a part of, I may have not been able to physically be there, but because I financially supported it, now I'm a part of a story of like all of these boys who are sending back videos saying thank you.
Yeah.
Because, man, I didn't have the time and the availability to go with 2 kids at home at the time.
Yeah.
And now 3. And I probably won't be able to go again this year, but I'm going to go.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Because I believe in it. And so I'm going to give to it. And I think that's what I would tell people. There's something about when you don't let anything control your life, especially your money, it's like, or your time or your gifting. It's like, I'm going to put a mission behind that.
Yeah.
And I think you see that, in Scripture, and I know personally what it's done for me in my life and in my heart to really live that way.
Yeah. I was just going to ask you an encouraging message for those, because you mentioned Christmas time and sort of this whole generosity, time of year where it's like you are being generous to people close to you, and hopefully, with gifts and things like that, hopefully you're being generous.
Yeah, right.
But I feel like it's such a time of year where people are kind of like, well, I need this for this gift or that gift, or I want to make sure that everybody feels this way.
Yeah.
What kind of encouragement would you give, or maybe some practical advice to kind of nurture that generosity spirit around this time of year?
One of the things that we encourage families to do is find someone together or something that you want to bless. And if you got kids, involve your kids with it. Before you talk about what do you want for Christmas, hey, what do you want me to give you for Christmas? Or what do you want Santa to bring you for Christmas, right? Hey, instead of that, what if the first question you asked was like, hey, is there a friend at school you'd like to do something nice for? Or you're at a church and you know a need right in the community, because like our church will have a lot of those different opportunities. That was one of the things we did last year. It's like, hey, if you know somebody that has a need in this community, tell us what it is. Right. And so we presented all these different things, and we were able to meet every one of them. And so I would just say, find something, someone, a church, an individual, a group of people, an organization that you believe in. And I would say, like, do it as a family and give to that, because it's better to give than to receive. And it's going to do something in you and in your family that you won't get just by receiving gifts. So that's one practical thing I'd say, like, hey, I would plan to be generous in this season, to just, again, protect your heart from that scarcity and your mind from that scarcity mindset and greed sitting in. So that would be one thing that I would encourage people with, man, is find something that you really believe in that can make a difference, a tangible difference in the life of other people, and involve as many people in it as you possibly can, and watch what it will do inside of you. Watch what it'll do inside of your heart.
It'll change your heart.
It will.
Yeah. Live generously, y'all.
That's right.
That's a good way to end it.
That's it.